Welcome to Spiritual Dynamics in Church Planting. I'm Matt Peoples here with our good friend, Steve Pike. How you doing, man?
Yeah. Awesome. How about you, Matt?
I can't complain. I've been pumped to have this conversation because something really interesting. Like I've been to umpteen church planting conferences, as most guys
Really?
have. Yeah, and you know what? You never see a church planting conference on prayer or fasting or just spiritual disciplines, period.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited that we're having this conversation because they've done research on some of the church planting movements, multiplying movements. Most of the time, they have to go out of the United States to even see
Right.
those. And what they found is one of the top pillars of a church planting movement is prayer and fasting.
Yeah.
And yet it's the last things we talk about. We don't even do a conference on it,
Right.
which is crazy.
Right. So
So
this is
that's
good. We're starting with it. This is good. Yeah.
we're starting an online conference that
Right.
we're also
Right now.
doing as a Facebook Live. And so if you guys are tuning in, we are super excited to have you here. I want to share with you, we're doing this spiritual dynamics in church planting. This is a part of some content that we are designing and creating for our Kairos Network church planting mobile app. Where we do church plant training and stuff like that. Steve is helping us out with a ton of content. And so the content that you see here is ultimately going to be right on, if I can get it to move around here, is going to be on our Kairos Network mobile app. And so you can check that out as well as on the Life of Church Planter, www.lifeofchurchplanter.com website. You'll be able to catch all these pieces of content live and on demand. So that'll be a great place to check all this stuff out. But today we're having a conversation on spiritual dynamics in church planting. And I'm excited that we get to talk to you, Steve, because you have 30 years plus experience in church planting. You've been a church planter. You launched the Church Planting Multiplication Network, CMN, and seen a ton of church plants do that. And now you're doing, and I love this new organization, the Urban Islands Project, where you seek to plant in hard to reach places. So,
Yeah.
Steve, this is one of the things you said is vital. What makes spiritual dynamics so vital in church planting?
That is a fantastic question, and kudos to you for you actually picked the order of the topics that we're going to be talking about, and you decided this is where we needed to start. And that's a great question to start with. Why is it so important? Well, I think some of the foundational ideas underneath why it's important start with, first of all, you're starting a church, not a social club or a public, a compassion ministry per se. Obviously, there will be social elements of the church, and obviously there will be compassion elements, and that's part of what being a healthy church is. But sometimes we get so focused on the mechanics and the logistics and the institutional elements that it's easy to lose sight of the fact that wait a minute, we're actually not the ones really starting this church. Jesus said, speaking of himself, I will build my church. So it's his church, and he will, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So we're actually joining Jesus on what he's doing, which is the second foundational idea, is he's building his church, and he's really kind of inviting us to help. We're called co-laborers with Christ. We're not the main architect here. We're not the main player. And so spiritual dynamics, if you're not in touch with the architect, with the main mover, with the person who's building the church, then whatever you do, it's not going to end up being the church.
Yeah, and that's not something that we talk about a lot. I think a lot of times we go to conferences and things like that. No conference is perfect. but we
Right.
focus a lot on best practices and tools and tips and tricks. And,
Right.
you know, we really neglect saying, hey, by the way, you're a co-laborer with Christ.
Right.
And so
Right.
how can you build this without Christ?
Yeah, and I think no, I don't think I wouldn't want to diss on any conference or anything. I think there's an assumption. I know this was the case a lot of times with things that I did. We sort of assumed, wait, you guys already know this.
Yeah.
This is like kindergarten stuff. You wouldn't be doing this. I mean, it's honestly a little bit crazy to think about church planning as something you want to do if you're not doing it in partnership with Christ. So I don't
Right.
think, I don't think we're pointing our finger and wagging at anybody and saying shame on you. However, I think what you're pointing out, and we need to just it's really good to be intentional and think about what that actually means. How do we, personally develop our spiritual relationship with Christ in a way that is healthy and creates a solid foundation for the church plant that is to come? Because you and I both know, unfortunately, there's way too many examples of people who over the long haul have clearly demonstrated that somewhere along the line they lost touch with
Yeah.
the source, and they end up, disqualifying themselves from ministry, or even worse, some people have even taken their own lives, because they were trying to do something that's supernatural in their own power. So I like to
Yeah. And,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that you put it that way, because I think we can make a lot of headway on our own.
Right. Oh
But
yeah.
I was just struck in the Psalms, where it says, if the Lord doesn't build it, it won't last. Not that it
Right.
won't be built. It can be built, but if the Lord's not building it, it won't last.
Right. Right. And I've seen it really important. I've seen that it's really important. Honestly, in some ways, the hardest phase of a church in terms of energy exertion, in terms of just rolling with the punches and the changes that are coming your way, is that startup phase. That's kind of, it's like, everything else, and anything that's getting started, that's kind of one of the most, I mean, even little babies, they got to have some help. It's a vulnerable time in the life of a church. And so, the temptation is really you've got to eliminate stuff that you feel like is sideways energy. And,
Yeah.
if you really don't have a conviction that staying connected to the Savior is not just sideways energy, but it's crucial, then what you do is you don't establish habits early on that lead to long-term habits that lead to long-term foundational help. So it's really, the temptation is, because you're so busy, because you have so many demands in your time, you have all this stuff thrown at you, you just start saying, well, I don't have time to pray, or I don't have time to listen to God, or I don't have time for this stuff.
Yeah.
Because again, that, in the physical realm, listening to God doesn't really feel like a whole lot is happening, and you're thinking, man, I got to
Mm-mm.
find a place to meet, and I got to recruit people, and I got to do this, I got to raise money,
I've
and you've got all
I've
these
got so
gotta's.
much to do.
I've got so much to do, and it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna, I'll pray once we get the church going, then I'll be able to
Then
pray.
I'll pray.
And so it's, I mean, I don't think we made it one of the points here, but it's got to be like woven into the fabric of your life, like right now, not
Mm-hmm.
something you're going to tag on later on. And one of the things that kind of helps me, because again, there's a legitimate tension. You do feel like, man, I've got 20,000 things to do today. And I've only got so many hours. And so something's got to give. And,
Yeah.
and so there is, and they're real stuff. It's not like you want to do bad stuff. It's not like, well, I want to go rob a bank today and do this and do that. You're actually thinking of
Yeah.
stuff that's really good. And so you're thinking, well, I need to go do that, and God will honor that. So here's the thing. Again, I like to say that starting a church is one part strategy and one part miracle. And what I mean by that is strategy is the stuff that you can do, or that you do and that you
Yeah.
can do. And the miracle is the stuff that only God can do, you know. And a genuine, authentic church is both of those things. It's strategy and it's miracle. And so yeah, you do need to, you know, find the place to meet, and you do need to recruit team members, and you do need to raise
Mhm.
money, or, you know, all that pragmatic, practical stuff that is
Yeah.
usually what we talk about at church planning conferences. That's all. It's real stuff. It needs to be done. And if you don't do it, you know, the you can go out of balance either way on the
Mhm.
strategy and miracle thing. You can be over dependent on your strategy and not dependent enough on God. Or you can actually say, you know, all I'm going to do is just pray all the time, 24/7, and just expect God to, you know, bring the money and the teams and all that kind of stuff. And it's never been that. You don't see that
Mhm.
anywhere in Scripture being modeled as that's how God
Mhm.
works with people. He always invites us to join Him. You know, He always invites us
Yeah.
to be part of it. He uses our physicality and our own intellect and all that kind of stuff to help bring things into being. And so, you know, there is this partnership. It's a mystical partnership that we don't fully
Mhm.
understand. But spiritual dynamics, when we use that phrase, that's what we're talking about. It's the intentionality where strategy and miracle come together. It's where we recognize and we validate and we practice the unity, or the reality that we're walking. You're sort of operating on dual channels. You know, strategy and miracle, those two channels, and they both need our attention.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that you say that it's not one or the other. And I love how you have that
Right.
quote: one part strategy, one part miracle, because I really believe that, and I think we tend to one side or the other. More, I think we tend to strategy, like we talked about. And so you had a couple key quotes I wanted to kind of highlight for everybody, which is one: you're starting a church, not a social club. I think that's
Right.
huge. And this is
Right.
the reason we're having this conversation. The other thing that you say, it's really important, is Jesus is building his church and he's invited you to help.
Right.
And I
Right.
love that. When you pull all that together, you really get this topic of spiritual dynamics. And
Right.
you define spiritual dynamics when we were talking as the place where strategy and miracle come together. And
Yeah.
when you were outlining kind of our conversation, you said really there's three key dynamics you want to talk about.
Right.
And the three key
Right.
dynamics you said were prayer, fasting, and dependency.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
do you want to take some time to dig into each one of those
Yeah.
and just kind of
Absolutely.
unpack it a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. Because again, I think the question that, or you know, I mean, really, we always have to go to, yeah, but how? You know, because it's
Mhm.
really easy to sort of beat ourselves down with, well, I know I need to pray more, and I'm terrible because I went a whole 24 hours and I didn't even talk to God and all this kind of stuff. And you know, I just want to help people think about this in a way that, you know, it's doable, and it's something you can do even in a really busy season, because that's going to be the story of your life for at least, you know, if you're starting a church, the first 3 or 4 years are pretty intense in terms of
Oh
activity.
man, absolutely.
You know, I mean, it never really slows down, but it is, you do reach a point where the rhythms of the church start to become familiar, and you settle into a rhythm that is doable. But there's this chaotic phase where the prayer thing's tough. So how do we do that? Yeah. So let's talk about those three things. Let's talk about, first of all, the
Cool.
rhythms of prayer. And I just, again, this is almost like the whole story about Vince Lombardi. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was
Mhm.
actually doing a conference up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the conference was being held right across the street from Lambeau Field. And you know, that I did not realize. I mean, I knew it was like an iconic place, but I had no idea how iconic it was. I mean, it's just an amazing story there. But one of the stories that they tell, so I went on the tour of Lambeau Field, you know, and by the way, at the end of the tour, if you ever go, they literally give like an altar call to become a Packers fan. I mean, it's like everybody here that now wants to be a Packers fan, raise your hand, you know. So anyway, you know, one of the stories they tell is about Vince Lombardi. You know, the Packers, for people who don't know it, won the first 2 Super Bowls. And after the first Super Bowl that they won, you know, they came back for their very first practice, headed into their second season. And, you know, these are the guys who just won the Super Bowl. They're literally the best football players on the planet. They're the best team on the planet. The whole team came back. I don't think there were any changes. Back in those days, they didn't do as much swapping around as we do now. Anyway, so Vince Lombardi stands up in front of the team, and he, you know, he doesn't say, "Gentlemen, we're the greatest team on earth." He holds up a football and he says, "Gentlemen, this is a football." And then he went on to talk about just the fundamentals of football to the best football players in the world. They could have been first graders learning about football for the first time. It was such a basic talk. But his point was, if we don't get the basics right, then you know, we're not going to be champions again. And if we don't get the basics of prayer, and here's the thing, again, if we're starting a church, but we personally are not people who have woven prayer into the fabric of our lives, then you know, we're going to be in trouble, and likely not starting a church. We'll start something else. So again, I just think it's important for people to pause and think about this. So how do we do this? And you know, personal prayer. So what I think the first stage of developing a personal prayer habit is just to find a time in your day. And again, I realize there's a chaotic nature to the startup phase. So sometimes your pattern is so irregular. It's not like you say, okay, every day at 6 o'clock in the morning, or at 10 o'clock at night, or at 1 o'clock, or 3 times a day. It's hard to establish, well, I'm going to do this every day at the same time, simply because you do have these unusual demands. But I would suggest that you say, I'm going to find a way to do something, a way to insert a focused prayer time into my daily life. And again,
And in your experience,
yeah,
what's been the best way to do that? So the planters that you've seen, because you've been, you know, your organization was a catalyst for 2,500 church plants.
Right.
You know a few planters, but in your estimation, the planters that have been able to work this rhythm in the best, what do they have in common? What is it that they commit to a specific time? Do they, like, how have you seen that work?
Well, that's kind of what, that's kind of what I'm saying is, I think it's, rather than feeling burdened by a specific time in the earliest phases, what I've seen is they look at every day sometimes. I mean, if it depends on the season you're in, but if you're looking at a season where, you know, your schedule is just all messed up because you just have a lot of different stuff going, what you want to do is find pockets and seasons and times in there, first of all, to say, I want to have a focused prayer time where that's all I'm doing. So for a lot of the best practices I've seen, a lot of guys like to combine doing some kind of physical exercise with a prayer time, because, you know, usually you can do something physical, especially if it's something like running, or, you know, even, you know, just working out. It may be in your home gym or your home room, whatever, you know, place where it's just you are by yourself. You know, figuring out a way to combine those two things, or you know, just look at the day, get up in the morning, first thing before you start doing anything, just look at your schedule for that day and just say, when is going to be a good time for me to be able to be focused today for, you know, a period of time. And I, you know, I don't think there's a magic number on how long you need to pray. But, you know, generally giving yourself 30 minutes or so of focused time where you're able to just really think through and talk through with God, and, you know, prayer. So anyway, so just give yourself some time, and then in that time frame, and probably 30 minutes is a good guideline. In that 30-minute time frame, you know, you want to, there's a reason Jesus gave us the Lord's Prayer. It's a pattern. And again, I think you can read it as a prayer that we actually pray, And you can also read it as a pattern that we follow. And I think both are legitimate. And if you follow it as a pattern, you see things like, you start with praise. You acknowledge your dependency on God. I mean, just follow through. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Kingdom come, thy will be done. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Just use that as a pattern and just walk through that. The thing that I think Jesus was modeling how we talk to God, but then I think there also needs to be included a time where we listen to God, where we just be still and be silent and meditate. And so again, I think it's not a bad idea to combine prayer with reading the word, so spending time, finding a little bit of time to read a portion of scripture and then let that become part of the prayer conversation with God, and then listening to
Yeah,
God.
for me, that's really been, and I mean, a lot of church planners, I think, kind of been this way. We tend to be very action oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Very, some planters can relate to this, but you feel like you have 1,000 ideas, and you're trying to implement the ideas that you have. You're trying to move forward. You're trying to kind of make things
Mm-hmm.
go. And so for me, kind of what you talked about, that praying scripture model. In fact, that's something we work in our Kairos training in our
Good.
prayer section has
Good.
been huge for me, because I found what I can
Yeah.
do with that is I can set a timer on my phone. And if I'm
Right.
I'm in a crowded Starbucks early in the morning, so it's not too crowded, but
Right.
I'll put my earbuds
Right.
in. I've got a prayer mix that like doesn't have any,
Yeah.
words on it. And
Right.
I'll set the timer. And when the timer's going, I don't worry about time because the time's blocked out. But when I'm
Yeah.
walking through scripture, I found it has really helped me to get new
Yeah.
language around prayer, to
Right.
feel that kind of conversational atmosphere with God a little bit more,
Right.
and
Right.
to really almost pray about things I wouldn't think to pray about.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to have that. I think it's also important, especially for new church starters, to be intentional about praying for the harvest. I mean, the big deal, if you're starting a church that's there to reach lost people, uh, Jesus literally said to pray that the Lord of the harvest will raise up laborers for the harvest. And so a lot of church planners struggle with, where do I get team members? And you know what? Just include that in your prayer time, and ask God, raise up leaders for the harvest. Just so, for some people, everybody's different. So it's really, what I don't like to do is be real prescriptive about,
Mhm.
this is how you do it, 45 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, whatever. I mean, I've heard, like you said, I'm familiar with a lot of church planners, and I guess the consistency is that they have some kind of plan
Mhm.
to make sure that they talk to God and listen to God on a regular basis. And, like you've mentioned, and I do think it makes sense to incorporate the word of God into that, to incorporate the actual harvest in front of you. And even the people that you're meeting, I think it's one of the principles that is really, we've discovered to be super powerful
Mhm.
in the startup phase of a church, is actually remember the names of people you meet as you go about doing all the stuff you're doing during the day, and literally pray for those people by name,
Mhm.
even though they may never even ever be part of the church that you're leading. There's something absolutely powerful about it. It changes prayer from being this kind of theoretical thing to, you're actually praying for real people that and you've met, and you're praying for them by name. So there's so half an hour is probably a minimum time frame,
Yeah.
to kind of give it. But again, I don't want people to, I think it's important not to be under this legalistic burden about it either, that you've got to, oh
Yeah,
man,
because
I've got to pray
I
this
think
many.
what you
Yeah.
highlighted well is the prescription is to pray, not how you
Right.
pray. So if prayer journaling
Right.
works, do that. If prayer walking works,
Right.
do that. If this is a new one for me, prayer working out works, do that one.
Yeah.
Whatever
Well,
tool in the tool belt is going to help you pray.
for, so for me, like right now, I live in Denver, Colorado, and we have these wonderful trails here that go along the creeks and the rivers that flow through the city. And these trails are paved bike trails and stuff. So I actually do this thing. I call it my Godcast. Instead of a podcast, sometimes I listen to podcasts, but
Yeah.
sometimes I just, I get on my bike and I start riding my bike, and I'm just open and listening to God.
Mm.
And so I get a great workout in, and I'm telling you, some of the best ideas that I've ever had came through the the
Godcast.
Godcast. Yeah. I was going to say God Pod, but that didn't make sense. So yeah. So I
Oh
mean,
man.
so the cool thing is, I think as you go along, you discover all. If you don't get your, what I guess what I would encourage is, yeah, you're right. The prescription is make time to listen and talk to God. How you do that is all over the map. And I even encourage, do different things. You go through different phases where you use different practices. Another place that I use in my life, because I live in a high-rise condo building, I have to take my dog out first thing in the morning, last thing at night, a couple times during the day. And you know, a lot of times my dog has become my best prayer partner. Because
Yeah.
you're just walking along, and he's doing his stuff, and it's just a quiet time, especially early in the morning. That's a great time for me. I usually, that's a prayer time for me that has become kind of part of the rhythm of my life when I'm here. And so just building it in is what you want to do, but make sure it's not an afterthought. Um, Make sure it's
Mhm.
something that is really important to you. So just a couple other thoughts on the prayer thing,
Yeah.
and that is, you obviously, you start with, you've got to be a person of prayer yourself. And usually when most people start churches, it's they themselves, maybe in their spouse, are the ones carrying the burden of things. But then as God begins to answer your prayer, and the harvesters are raised up and they become part of your team, there's a couple of different things to think about here. Number one is, you want to encourage them. You want to make it a priority for them. You want to make it a core DNA value of the emerging church that the leaders are going to be people of prayer. And so, that's why it's important to personally begin to have that habit formed in your life, and then share that habit with other people in a way that there's a little, again, a healthy level of accountability, where you're saying, look, if you're going to be part of the team, it's really strategically important. And for these very reasons we're talking about, we're starting a church, not a social club. We're partnering with Jesus. He's invited us to help. You've got to be in touch with him. And it's not just the pastor or the key leader's job to be the prayer person, but you want your team to be people of prayer as well. And so that, I would say it's extremely important to make that, like, I recommend people, when they're thinking about team members, that they do think about, what are the qualities that we want these team members to have. And one of those is going to be that they be people of prayer. But then the other thing that you want to think
Well, and
about
I think
that's really
too,
important.
before
Oh,
we
yeah, go ahead.
pull off
Yeah.
that one, is the same way that we took an opportunity to talk through tools for prayer, how you can pray, different ways you can do it. I think a lot of times the biggest thing we neglect in the church, and even in church planting, is we tell people pray, we don't tell them how. So
Right.
take the tools you're using, share other tools with them, give
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
encourage them to pray, but give them the tools.
Yeah. And maybe even once in a while, pause and say, hey, it's been a while since we talked about prayer as a team. And by the way, obviously, you do build prayer into what you're doing
Mhm.
as a team. So you're modeling that in the team meetings. You make sure you give space for talking to God. And again, going back to what I said earlier, we encourage our guys to, not only personally be praying for people by name, but then bringing those folks into these team meetings and corporately be praying for people by name, so that it keeps the team meetings are focused on the harvest. And a great way to focus on the harvest is, hey, let's think about the people that we're praying for right now, and what are you aware of in their lives that we need to give special attention to in our prayer today. And so the meetings, your literal team meetings, become wrapped around prayer. But then I agree with you, literally taking time to say, hey, it's been a while since we talked about our personal prayer habits. and maybe some of you have, just discovered some new things that are really helpful to you, and you want to share that with everybody, and so like you said, you can, maybe somebody can share the workout prayer regimen, and
Yeah.
and another person can be inspired by it and go, hey, that's a great idea, and so yes, making just again, weaving it into the fabric of everything. But the other thing you want to do is not only the team that's actively active with you, but then I just believe it's so important for church planners to cultivate a prayer team beyond that group of people who are actually on the ground starting the church. And so tapping into your relational network, there's people, the cool thing about it is, I mean, man, I love the fact that I've got people that I've never even been in the same room with them, but they've heard about what we're doing, and they send me a note and say, hey, I just want you to know I'm praying for you. And some of that's happened because they took the initiative, but I realized long ago how important that is, where, I've created ways for people to kind of join a prayer team, and throw stuff out to them occasionally. So you've got this broad band of prayer covering that's kind of happening over the whole project. And it's not just the weight isn't all on you, but it's being shared, and it's not just on the team that's there doing the work, but it's actually shared out across sort of the relational network. And you encourage, not only you do that, but you encourage your team members to tap into, some of them have praying grandmas and moms and dads and grandpas and stuff who are real prayer warrior kind of people. And, encouraging, just building that out as big as you can get it is not a bad thing to do.
And so the last thing you said with prayer, and maybe you've covered this in the other aspects, was just that proactive prayer practices. Now,
So,
what do you mean when you say that?
Well, what I mean by that, and probably that goes to I'm really thinking about the corporate practices, but I think you could apply it to the personal prayer or prayer life as well. And so one of them is prayer walking, where you literally, either as an individual or as a team, you walk through a space. I don't know if you've heard of the book The Circle Maker by Mark Batterson. But Mark literally, Mark is actually a really good friend. In fact, I was his youth pastor when he was in high school. And so when Mark was, I didn't even know that he was writing that book, but I had a reason to go visit him in DC. And I got there, and, I was invited to be part of something we were doing. And he said, let me tell you about this book I'm going to, soon be releasing. And he said, in fact, I want to take you on the walk. And so we literally went around the circle that he had walked. That was kind of the inspiration for that book. And it was amazing to see what had happened inside of that circle through the over the years. It didn't all happen immediately, but, just incredible miracles. And the foundation was really this prayer walking habit that he formed. And so it depends on how people view all this stuff, but I think there's something to be said for, God created a physical world, and the physical world is real, and the spiritual world is real, and prayer brings those two things together. And there's nothing kooky or crazy about literally circling a place. Like if you're focused on a neighborhood or a community, figuring out how to surround that place with prayer. So prayer walking is good, and doing it, individually is certainly valid. Doing it as a group, walking together through a community, praying over key places in that community, those are great practices, because again, it's a tangible expression of our dependency on God. And then
we had a church planner who did that in St. Louis and actually mapped it out on Google Maps. In fact, all these practices we're talking about, we've got them embedded in the Kairos Network mobile training app. And there's a prayer walking one, there's praying scripture, there's, we'll have to do a workout one. Maybe my CrossFit coach can help out. I don't know. But I think find some of those things that are good for you. But I love that intentionality, because you're absolutely right. There's an actual spiritual world, an actual physical world. We preach about it on Sundays. Can we live that reality out?
Yeah. And then, just good old fashioned prayer meetings is another proactive prayer practice. It's, you're calling people to prayer. I mean, that's a good old biblical practice of just calling people together for a season of prayer, for group prayer. And, you know, that I suggest that it's good to sort of have some organization, because again, you go back to not everybody even knows how to pray. So, you know, if you call a prayer meeting, just give people some guidelines and you know, invite them into, okay, now we're going to do this and now we're going to do that, and just have some structure to it that helps everybody be focused together on different things that need to be prayed for. And there's a billion different directions you can go in with that. You know, you can pray for, you know, the government, the leaders, for the civic leaders in your community. You can pray for the business deal. You can pray for all the different sectors of society, and it's a real thing. I mean, it's you're actually having a real impact through that, and so that's really powerful. You know, there's, and you mentioned, and I'm guessing with the Kairos Network resources, you've got some other stuff that some other proactive practices, and the point is, you've got, for this stuff to happen, it's got to be scheduled into your life or scheduled onto your calendar. You know, so like that's what, when we're talking about prayer walks, those are not going to happen by accident. You know, you've got to forethink those. You've got to say, we're going to get together on such and such a day at such and such a time, and we're going to do this. And so it does require, just like anything else that's worth doing, it requires some forethought, some structuring. And that's, again, why prayer often doesn't happen, is because we just don't, we don't structure it. We don't structure for it. And so just do that, put it on the calendar, make it happen, do it. And I've never seen anybody regret. I've never had anybody say, you know, boy, I wish we wouldn't have had that prayer meeting.
Yeah. I wish we didn't pray. No, I think that's huge, but you know, and we could stay on this the whole time, but I think this next one is, I was surprised. I was at a exponential learning cohort on church plant multiplication, discipleship multiplication. And we were in our first sessions, and we were talking about prayer and fasting. And I asked the question, hey, what's a good resource for fasting? And literally no books, you know, nobody's written a book on this. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this idea of fasting. And you said something really interesting. You gave us a definition. I'm going to read this and get you to kind of riff on it a little bit. But you said, rhythms of fasting. Fasting is not holding God hostage by showing him how spiritual you are. Fasting is deliberately choosing to focus your energy and attention to the things that matter most to God. And I love that you said that, because a lot of times when you do see some people fasting, that's the impression you get. They're like, well, I'm just not going to eat until, you know, like King Saul. Well, we're just not going to do this until, you know, God delivers us from this enemy. And Jonathan's like, oh, you moron. Why?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's, you know, I think the reason that fasting is not a more regular practiced spiritual discipline is because people really don't get that. They actually do think, and I don't know, well, maybe that's some of the reason where it came from, is those kind of stories where you see some people doing that, but that's not, you know, one of the passages in scripture, and I can't remember where this is, but it's the passage where, you know, it literally says, now this is the fast that I have chosen. And it has to do with, you know, it's basically speaking out against this idea that you're going to hold me hostage. Like, I'm going to go on a hunger strike until you do what I want you to do, God. That's not what fasting is about. What really happens in fasting, and honestly, I want to say that, well, I'll talk about that in a minute. The purest definition of fasting really is physically not doing without food for a period of time. I mean, you see the fast that Jesus did, which is one of the models that we have in scripture. He went into the wilderness and he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. And it was a physical fast. And so one of the things that I've discovered in my own personal practices of fasting is, you know, I hear people say a lot, you know, hey, just fast a meal, which I think is great. But what I discovered was, after after about, and I think everybody's physiology is different. So this
Hmm.
may not apply to everybody, but I know in my personal experience, about 3 days in, after
Hmm.
going without food, you get, those first 3 days are not easy. Your body basically starts detoxing. And so here's the thing, is you're sort of going, why am I doing this? Because it feels like
Yeah.
sort of a weird form of torture or something. And it does
Hmm.
feel sort of like you're holding God hostage. But what I noticed is after I get past that phase where my body's kind of gotten all those toxins out, and everything sort of settles down, wow, you enter into this phase. And I'm not sure how long it lasts. The longest I've ever fasted
Hmm.
is about 2 weeks. I've not done the 40-day
Hmm.
thing. Some people I know have, but you know, I do know that people that have gone really long say eventually your hunger starts coming back. But for after about 3 days, the hunger kind of goes away. And what's really cool is it almost like all of your physical cravings are toned down. Everything, your
Hmm.
sexual cravings, your physical hunger cravings, everything just gets toned way down. And it's just actually way easier to listen and focus on God, because you're not thinking, man, I'm hungry, or man, whatever. It's weird. It's like, not weird. It's not the right word. It's amazingly powerful. And so,
Hmm.
um, you know, I think that it's important for people to understand again, we're physical and spiritual, and so there's a connectivity between those two things.
Hmm.
And the real payoff in fasting, um, certainly there's value in just saying, hey, I'm going to just do
Hmm.
without this meal and pray during that time.
Right.
That's what a lot of
Hmm.
people do. But an extended fast has value that goes way deeper and way stronger. And I would say that when you're facing, and certainly starting a new faith community is a great example of when you're facing something challenging. An extended fast is a great way to prepare for that, because it tones down your physical cravings, and it's it enhances your spiritual receptors to really hear God's voice, and really let God speak to you. And it just uh, it's hard to describe the benefit until you actually go there and experience it. So
And so
um,
when you said you fasted for 2 weeks, are you talking no food for 2 weeks?
well, yeah, in my case, I did a fast that was, I had no solid food. I did
Mm.
do some juice. It was probably a extreme Daniel fast. I didn't eat any meat. Daniel fast is pretty. A lot of people are familiar with that, and
Hmm.
I think Rick Warren kind of popularized that. And it's more, you basically don't eat meat, and you basically become vegetarian for a period of time. This was a little bit stronger than that. I didn't eat anything that needed to be chewed, and
Yeah.
basically I subsisted on either water or just like vegetable juice was all I had for 2 weeks. And so that was the longest that I've gone. But anyway, and so uh, you do want to kind of ease into that. I think another mistake people make is they say, well, I'm going to be fasting for, and so, you go gorge yourself all kinds of heavy, fatty, cholesterol ridden foods because you're saying,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to be fat. Well, that actually makes it harder to do the fast because your body
Hmm.
has to get all those toxins out. And so you're going to have headaches and all kinds of stuff. So it's
Hmm.
better to sort of ease into it where you start backing down. And then if you're going to do an extended fast, I mean, if you're just doing
Yeah.
a day or you're just doing a meal, go ahead and, go extreme and just go from one to
Yeah.
the other. But
Yeah. So what are, like, if you're, because the first time I ever fasted was praying through moving to Knoxville to plant the church, and I did a 24-hour, and then I cut out the lunchtime meals for a
right,
week. And
yeah,
so what would you say is kind of the best way to step into fasting for the first time?
Yeah, right. Well, I would suggest that you do start with a meal one week, and the next week and say, okay, now I'm going to go for 2 meals, and then the next week say, okay, one day I'm going to go for a whole day. So you're sort of learning how your body reacts to that, and because honestly, what you want to get away from is your body screaming at you, and
Yeah.
so because then the whole idea of, not the whole idea, but a big part of the idea, like I said, is to focus. It's to focus your energy and your attention on things that matter most to God. And so anyway, so you want to just sort of learn how you respond or how you react a little bit and so just don't go from, okay, I'm going to go on a 40-day fast for your first effort,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then, so ease into it. And then also it's important not to just come blasting out of it and say, okay, I'm going to go, eat a huge meal, because that will, boy, your digestive tract will not be ready if you've been
Ah, yeah.
going without for a long time. So you want to ease back in. And the good thing about it is, again, the extended fast, you get to a point where you're actually not that hungry. The weird thing is, food is not even that interesting to you. I actually found that when I went that long, when I go that long, um, I almost have to kind of make myself eat, because it's just not something I feel like I need anymore. And so the thing is, you'll know when you do need to start eating. When you start feeling hungry again, that means you're starting to starve to death. And so, if you go for a really long fast,
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
body's going to let you know when it's time to really start eating again. So and we're talking a lot about the physical
Yeah.
thing. So what I would
Yeah,
suggest
talk
is that,
talk to me about how you take and make it more than just a physical thing. Because actually, the people that talk the most about fasting are the diet experts, the people that are like,
right,
"Hey, if you want to lose
right,
weight." And so, what
right,
keeps this
right,
from being a purely physical thing? And what are some things that you incorporate to be
right.
very intentional that this is me seeking God and not trying to lose 20 pounds?
Right. So there is this practical thing that, in order to eat a meal, most of the time we sit down, we stop whatever it is we're doing,
Mhm.
and we focus on eating the food, or, the point is, the whole exercise of feeding ourselves and receiving nutrition does require a focus. And so a natural thing is, and this is, I think people know this, but just to say it, just to make it clear, is, take the time that you would normally take to eat the food
Mhm.
to actually spend time with God. And so for most people, like if you already have a prayer habit, that will be an additional time, because you're probably not praying while you're having breakfast or lunch or dinner. You're
Right.
probably praying some other time, if you're doing your workout prayer or your Starbucks prayer or whatever. It's so the point is, what you actually do is you add some space in your life that is normally used for another purpose, to actually talk and listen to God. And like I said, I think the longer the deeper you go into the fast, the better you're able to hear God. Your body starts quieting
Mhm.
down, and so those prayer times become more powerful. um, and I think, really, to me, the thing about fasting, again, it's not holding God hostage. It actually opens your spiritual ears up to be able to hear
Mhm.
from God a little more effectively than you would normally. So again, the idea is, you stop what you're doing and you go eat. You stop what you're doing and go prayer. And now you've got, depending on how long you're going to be fasting, you've got at least one meal period, maybe 20 to 30 minutes, that you didn't have the day before, because you're saying, I'm going to pray. So that just gives you more
Mhm.
literal time to be in touch with God. Um, and so, again, as we talked about with just prayer itself, fasting, if you want, you've got to practice that yourself, which qualifies you to help other people begin to practice
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
so, and that's again, there's a benefit to having a group of people who are in agreement. We're going to fast together. So there's certainly times when it's appropriate for church planning leaders to invite their team to enter into a period of fasting.
Mhm.
And again, that's just all dependent. You may have a big event coming up and you just really want God's anointing to be on that event, and you want to focus your prayer energy and your thought and your listening energy on what is God saying to us about this. And that's again just calling people, hey, let's
Mhm.
take Thursday. I was part of a church staff that every Friday we fasted lunch. That was one of our deals. We fasted lunch every
Mhm.
Friday, and we took time to pray for people or in countries that had a lot of influence from Islam, because that's what the Muslim religion
Right.
practices, fasting on Fridays. So we said, well, we'll practice
Mhm.
fasting too, and just pray for our Muslim brothers and sisters, during that time frame. And so, that was a team effort. It was a large church staff. It was a mega church. We had like 16 pastors on staff, and we all fasted. Although the hilarious thing is, one day I was getting ready to head to the meeting where we were gonna, it was our daily. We would fast and pray during that time, and I passed one of the doors of one of our other pastors. He's in there wolfing down some food. I'm like, "What are you doing, man?" He goes, "Well," he said, "the fast starts at noon and it ends at 1." So he said, I was like, "Okay, you're kind of missing the point, dude."
Yeah.
And that's the thing, the thing about all this stuff is you don't want to make it a legalistic practice, because then you start doing goofy stuff like that, where you're playing this game where, like, okay, yeah, we're going to fast from 12 to 1. So that means I can eat right up until, 11:59:59. And then at 1:01:01, or 1:01:01, I'm eating again.
Wow.
That's silly. It misses the whole point. But so team fasting is a valid thing, though, and church fasting, calling people to pray together. But as you mentioned, I think there's also value, if you go back to the definition I gave you, is choosing to focus your energy and attention to the things that matter most to God. There are so many distractions in our lives these days, and there's
Yeah.
absolute value in also saying, I'm going to do a media fast, or I'm going to do a social media fast, or I'm going to do, you instead of surfing Facebook for half an hour, you say, I'm going to not do that today, and I'm going to instead spend time talking to God or listening to God. And so what you're doing
Yeah, and I've
through,
found when I've done that in the past, like you said, whether it's last year was during Lent, it was social media. One year it was any kind of like TV or streaming TV or all this kind of stuff. And what I found was it reordered the priorities. So things that had a lopsided priority in my life,
right,
all of a sudden didn't become as important. Now, for me, the amazing thing is social media still, after doing that fast, has not found the same kind of place in my life
grip, yeah,
that it
right,
used to.
right,
And
right,
so I think that's another side benefit of fasting is being able to reset those priorities, move it back to
yes,
God.
absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And so there's certainly value in that, and uh, the way you figure out what you need to fast and those kinds of things is, like you just said, what is it that you find yourself compelled, if you cannot leave your phone laying on the table or in your pocket for more than 5 minutes at a time without having to look at it, without feeling compelled to look at it, you probably need to fast that for a
Yeah.
little while. It and you're right, it does help you kind of reset the priorities, and it's just a healthy thing to do once in a while. So this is such foundational stuff, but because again, it goes back to, man, healthy leaders have a much higher probability of starting healthy churches because they personally are practicing these important healthy things, and they're building that into the foundational DNA of the leadership team that is leading that church. And that is just it will emanate out through everything that the church ever does and ever becomes. And so that's why these things are so important to put into. So again, strategy and miracle. The strategy is to make a plan that you're going to make prayer a real part of your life, and that fasting will be something that you practice as well, and learning how to do that. And when you mentioned that question about, I know there actually are books on fasting, but they're older ones, that like you got to go back
Yeah.
to the 1800s and stuff like that. So, I think if you Google it, and you'll be able to find some of the older books out there that you might be able to get through somewhere. I don't know.
Well, and with
If you really
Lent
want to dig
coming
into
up,
it.
yeah, because
Yeah,
Lent, my denomination, Lent's a natural time. We'll kick off Ash
right.
Wednesday, and there's that natural 40-day period that
Yeah,
they build in for
yeah.
fasting. So if somebody
Which
wants
is
to try fasting,
exactly,
maybe they want to, yeah.
yeah.
What would you be
Go ahead.
the keys? Because kind of as I've heard you talking about fasting, some of the keys are simply you want to pick what it is you're going to fast from, something
Yeah,
that's going to force you to focus in on God. You want to make sure that you're
right,
using that time to then focus in on God and not just like
right,
using your willpower and showing how strong you are. And then
right,
I think the last key that you kind of mentioned is just setting some kind of definite time period, a beginning and an end, as to
right.
when that
Yeah,
fast is
yeah.
going to go.
And planning around that, and sort of phasing into it and phasing out of it. So the plan isn't just, I'm going to fast for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or 10 days or 20 days, whatever. The plan is the core, the actual period of the fast is going to be 1 day, whatever. But I need to allow, depending on the length of the fast, a little bit of prep time coming in, and a little bit. And this goes to, especially if it's physical. Obviously, with social media, I think you just stop it. Don't wean yourself off of that. Just stop it.
Don't wean yourself.
And
Just stop. Just stop. Yeah.
Just stop. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff you
Oh,
just stop, but you just have to use wisdom when it comes to your physical stuff. And some people have physical challenges that fasting is literally not something they can do. As far as physical
right.
fasting, going without food, they have nutritional requirements that it would be dangerous for them to just stop. And so again, I just using wisdom, not being super spiritual. Again, there's always these, you can get out of balance in either direction, and don't
Mm-hmm.
make it a legalistic thing you do. And I appreciate you're
And
mentioning of,
so,
there's a lot of groups do have things like a lot of denominations have a rhythm. They have a calendar that includes a time when it's natural for fasting and some of these spiritual disciplines to really be practiced, because there's a lot of, it's easier to do when it's a group thing, when everybody's kind of doing
yeah,
it. There's healthy peer pressure there, so that's good. So if you're part of a
yeah.
denomination where that is part of the deal, take advantage of that, lean into it. Don't cheat yourself from that. So you were starting to say something.
And
Sorry.
so, yeah, for the last bit of our time, and this is the one that intrigued me because prayer and fasting, they've made sense to me. But this last one you talk about, this last spiritual dynamic, I think is huge. And you call it cultivating a spirit of dependency.
Yeah.
Talk
Yeah.
talk to us about what it looks like to cultivate a spirit of dependency. Is that like a natural byproduct of the prayer and the fasting?
Well,
Or
yeah, I
is it
mean,
something
yeah,
kind of that stands on its own?
I think I would say it is an outcome of those spiritual disciplines of prayer and fasting, and all the things that are wrapped up into that. We haven't even talked about, again, reading the word, taking the word in, is all that stuff adds up to what I would call a spirit of dependency. Which, here's the thing, again, the great thing about our current environment for starting new churches, is that there are so many great resources available to people and you go to all these training events and you're just loaded with all this really good stuff. And it's so easy to just put your dependency on those models and those best practices, so the whole reason I wanted to emphasize this here as a part of the spiritual dynamics segment that we're talking about is that, again, I do think you've got to be intentional about reminding yourself that these models, these best practices, all that stuff at the end of the day is not where your main dependency needs to lie. It's gotta be with God. So, looking to God for provision first. Our tendency is we want to know, what does this organization do to support church planners financially? That's our, and I'm not saying that's a incorrect question to ask. It's not wrong it's just makes sense to ask that. But if that's where you start, if the first thing you care about is what are these people giving, you're in trouble, because at the end of the day, God is your source, and everything else is the conduit through which he provides the resources and the needs that you have. And so you've got to have this mentality that if I don't have a relationship with God personally, and if we're not actually partnering with Jesus to build his church, if this isn't something he wants to happen, whatever we do is not actually going to be the church. So we look to God for provision first, and then we look to everybody else. We look to, and actually what I just said is important to format into our thinking. It's not, God is the source. So people are not our source. People are the conduit through which everything comes. And so spiritual dependency means we understand without him, we got nothing, and it's
I like how you wrote it here. When you were sending over the notes, we got a slide here. I love how you put, look to God for provision first, then everyone else. It's not don't look to other people, but look to God first. And the other thing you said that I thought was huge is anchor your confidence in Christ first, then on your own abilities, experiences, education, etc. And I love that.
Right. Yeah. And then the other thing is dependence on God actually becomes tangible through teamwork, because one of the mistakes a lot of leaders make that are starting a church is they just want to do everything themselves. And when you depend on God, he's going to raise up people around you, and inviting other people to join you and relying on them to help you is actually a tangible expression of your dependency on God, because he's honored when we optimize our effectiveness through interdependency with others. We were never meant to do this by ourselves. And so there are people who appear to have successfully done stuff as lone rangers, but the reality is we've got to have other people helping us. And honestly, we hold back the potential of what the church can be if we hold everything close to this. So you start with a foundation of dependency on God, and that will lead you to a willingness and an ability to realize he's brought people around you as resources to help get stuff done. And you get a lot more done if you build a team and you exercise teamwork. So
yeah, I absolutely love that idea of teamwork, because I think we get the Lone Ranger mentality. In fact, that's why we started the Life of Church Planner Facebook group. That's why we do things like the Kairos Network mobile app, stuff like that, is because too often we feel like we have to do it alone. And the other side of that is you then feel alone. You feel like all these challenges are yours alone. You feel like you're the only one walking through these struggles. And the reality is it's just not true.
It's not true. And you weren't built to have that pressure on you. So it ends up tearing you apart, And so, going back to just these basic things is so important. You get these things right. There's a lot of other things that you do need to have in mind, but if you get these things right, the probability of you being effective at what God's called you to do goes sky
Yeah.
high. You get these things wrong. You don't prioritize these, and you're kind of on your own because you're not connected to the source that's going to give you the power and the ability to do what God's called you to do.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I appreciate it. I want to let you guys know, one, we've got a couple great episodes where we talk about all the dynamics of church planting on Life of a Church Planner. You can go to www.lifeofchurchplanner.com. You can also see we've got a whole list of webinars that we put up. And while some of the dates are a little bit flexible, we've got some general dates in there for you. And so we're going to cover all different things. We're going to cover financing in the church. We're going to cover building leadership pipelines. We're going to cover building a team. We're going to cover all kinds of stuff. So you can check out a full list of those different topics that are coming up on Life of Church Planner. And of course, the whole reason we did this webinar thing is we're kind of using it as an opportunity to just create some live content for the Kairos Network mobile app. So if you go on the mobile app, there's a whole church planner training on there. And so this topic that we talked about today with Steve is actually going to be embedded into the training right there on the Kairos Network mobile app under personal and spiritual vitality. So you can download that at the Kairos Network, or you can go to the kairosnetwork.com. If you don't find it in your app store, you can go there online to find it. And of course, if you want to share this webinar out, you can do that by going back to lifeofchurchplanner.com, www.lifeofchurchplanner.com. You can click the link. You can share out the webinar link with anybody. It's going to be on demand now until we stop paying the bill. So, Steve, I want to thank you for just taking the time to dig into this with us, because it really has been just a true blessing to get to talk through, to get to kick this all off by talking through prayer and fasting and dependency, and that you would share your time and that wealth of knowledge. It's just really appreciated.
Hey, thank you. And I'm excited about what you're doing. I'm excited about the Kairos Network and all the people that are going to benefit from it. I love your vision for making this so shareable and accessible to everybody. And I think I'll be taking advantage of that myself. So
That's awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook. Thanks for tuning in on the webinar. And we'll catch you next time right here on Life of Church Planner.